kingdom of Eldoria was peaceful, its people living simple but happy lives in small villages surrounded by wide fields of green. At the heart of the kingdom was a grand palace where King Frederick ruled with wisdom. He had grown old, and his health was starting to fail. His beard was now mostly gray, and his once sharp eyes were often clouded with weariness. He knew his time as king was coming to an end, and that worried him greatly. In the quiet, grand chamber of the palace, the king called for his trusted assistant, Hannah. She had worked for him for many years, helping with matters of state and taking care of his personal needs. She was a strong woman with a calm demeanor, and she had always been someone the king could rely on. "Hannah," the king said, his voice soft but filled with concern, "I am not well. I fear my time is almost over." Hannah stood beside him, her expression full of care. "Your Majesty, you must rest. You have served the kingdom well." The king nodded slowly, but shook his head in sadness. "It is not rest that troubles me. It is my son, Thomas. He is kind, but he is young and lacks experience. I fear he will not know how to rule this kingdom when I am gone." Hannah was silent for a moment. Prince Thomas was still just a teenager, and though he was good-hearted, he had not yet learned the ways of leadership. He had been sheltered from the burdens of the crown, and now it seemed that the king feared he would not be strong enough to protect the kingdom. "I want you to promise me something," the king said, his voice urgent. "Promise me that you will guide Thomas, protect him from harm, and help him grow into the ruler this kingdom needs. He may be young, but I trust you more than anyone to help him." Hannah felt a heavy weight in her chest. "I swear, Your Majesty, I will protect him with all that I have." The king smiled weakly, grateful for her promise. "Thank you, Hannah. I know I can rest in peace, knowing you will be there for him." That very night, the king passed away in his sleep. His death was peaceful, but the kingdom was filled with sorrow. Prince Thomas, though grief-stricken, took his father's place as the new king. Hannah stood by his side, her promise to the late king now her guiding principle. The funeral of King Frederick was grand, with all the nobles and people of the kingdom paying their respects. As Thomas sat in the throne for the first time, he felt the weight of the crown pressing down on him. He was overwhelmed, unsure of how to lead, unsure of what to do. But one man was there to offer his guidance, Duke Victor, a nobleman who had long been close to the royal family. He was tall, with a sharp face and a voice that sounded both comforting and commanding. He had been a friend to King Frederick, but now that Thomas was king, he positioned himself as a loyal advisor. "Your Majesty, Duke Victor said with a bow. I will help you learn the ways of ruling. It is not easy, but together we can make this kingdom prosper. Thomas looked at him, his heart full of uncertainty. I don't know where to begin, he admitted. There's so much to do, and I fear I will make mistakes. Duke Victor smiled warmly. Do not worry, my prince. You are not alone. I will help you. Hannah watched from a distance, her eyes narrowing. She had worked closely with Duke Victor for many years and had always found him charming. But there was something about him now that made her uneasy. She had seen how easily he won the trust of others, and it worried her how quickly he was getting close to Thomas. As the days passed, Duke Victor became a frequent presence at the palace. He would offer advice on matters of court and even private counsel to Thomas. At first, the young prince was grateful for his help, but Hannah could see that Thomas was becoming too reliant on Victor's suggestions. She could also see that the Duke's influence was growing, and that made her uncomfortable. Your Majesty, I must warn you, Hannah said one evening, as she found Thomas alone in the palace garden. You must be careful of Duke Victor. His kindness may be a mask for something else. Thomas looked at her, surprised. But he has been nothing but helpful. He has been guiding me. Hannah sighed, her expression serious. I know, but that is how he operates. He is clever and knows how to make people trust him. I'm afraid his intentions may not be as good as they seem. Thomas frowned, unsure. What should I do then? He is helping me, and I don't know anyone else who could guide me. Hannah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I will always be here for you, my prince. But you must learn to trust yourself too. Do not rely too much on others, especially those who have their own ambitions. But Thomas, overwhelmed by the pressure of ruling, dismissed her warning. He felt that he needed Duke Victor more than anyone else, even though deep down he could sense that something was wrong. As the weeks passed, Duke Victor continued to weave his influence around Prince Thomas. One day, he suggested that Thomas take a journey to a distant town to meet with allies from other regions. It seemed like a good idea to Thomas at first, a way to strengthen his rule and gain support for his leadership. I will arrange for your safety, Your Majesty, Duke Victor said, his voice smooth. We will travel together, and you will make new friends who will help you. But Hannah had a bad feeling about this plan. She had heard rumors that there were bandits along the roads, and she couldn't shake the suspicion that Duke Victor might be leading them into a trap. She begged Thomas to reconsider. Please, my prince, do not go alone. Let me come with you. But Thomas, trusting Duke Victor and not wanting to seem weak, refused. I will be fine, Hannah. I trust Duke Victor. He will protect me. Reluctantly, Hannah agreed, though her heart told her this was a mistake. She had to go with them, even if it meant disobeying Thomas's wishes. As they traveled, everything seemed fine at first. The countryside was peaceful, and the sun was shining brightly. But as night fell, the group was ambushed by a group of bandits lying in wait. The attackers came from all sides, swords drawn, and the sound of steel clashing filled the air. Hannah, who had grown up in a small village and knew how to defend herself, didn't hesitate. She drew her sword and stood in front of Thomas, her eyes fierce. "Stay back, Your Majesty," she shouted. The bandits were strong, but Hannah was faster. She fought with all her might, cutting down attackers as they tried to surround them. At the same time, the loyal guards who had accompanied them joined the battle. Together, they fought off the bandits, but not without difficulty. In the end, the ambush was foiled, and the group survived. But the attack left Thomas shaken. He looked at Hannah with a new respect, realizing that her warnings had been true. "Hannah, Thomas began, his voice unsteady. "I should have listened to you." Hannah simply nodded, her expression calm but firm. "It is not too late to trust me now, Your Majesty." After the battle with the bandits, Thomas and his group sought shelter in a nearby town. The air was thick with tension, and Thomas couldn't stop thinking about how close he had come to losing everything. He looked at Hannah, who had fought so bravely to protect him. He was filled with gratitude, but also a growing awareness that he needed to be more careful and perhaps start trusting others beyond just Duke Victor. The small town they arrived at was peaceful, with cobblestone streets and modest homes. As the group rested at the local inn, Thomas ventured out to explore. He wandered through the town's main square, his eyes drawn to a small library tucked away between two stone buildings. Inside, the shelves were filled with books of all kinds, and at the center of it all was a young woman sitting behind a desk, reading. She had dark hair, neatly tied in a simple braid, and her face was calm and thoughtful. Her name was Clara. Clara looked up as Thomas entered, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized the young prince. "Your Majesty," she said, with a small but warm smile, bowing her head respectfully. Thomas felt a strange sense of peace in her presence, something he hadn't felt since the loss of his father. "Please, there is no need for such formality," he said, feeling a bit awkward. "I am just trying to understand this world better." Clara smiled again, her eyes kind. Books have a way of showing us things we might not see otherwise. Intrigued, Thomas sat down across from her. They spoke about many things: books, the nature of leadership, and even life in the small town. Clara's words were thoughtful, and she seemed to understand people in a way Thomas had not yet learned. As the conversation grew longer, Hannah entered the library, her eyes searching for Thomas. She had grown concerned when he had left the inn without telling anyone. Seeing the young woman speaking so easily with Thomas, a part of her wondered if Clara could be trusted. She had a strange feeling about this girl, though it was not one of distrust. Something about Clara's wisdom seemed to bring out the best in Thomas. Clara caught Hannah's eye and smiled politely. "Hello. I'm Clara. It's an honor to meet you, Lady Hannah." Hannah gave a polite nod, though she studied Clara closely. She was young, kind, and seemed to know how to talk to Thomas in a way that felt natural, not like the political conversations he had with Victor. Hannah couldn't help but wonder if Clara's calmness and clarity might help Thomas in ways that she herself could not. Thomas, noticing the look between the two women, turned to Clara. "Hannah has always been by my side," he said. She's my advisor." Clara's smile deepened. "Then she is lucky to have such a loyal prince," she said with warmth. The compliment made Thomas feel both awkward and pleased. He had never thought of himself as someone deserving of loyalty, but Clara's words made him reconsider. Maybe, just maybe, he could be the kind of king people could trust. Days passed as the group continued their stay in the town, and Thomas found himself spending more and more time with Clara. She was thoughtful and grounded, always offering wisdom without the need for praise or recognition. Clara never seemed to be looking for anything from him, and that was a welcome change from the constant flattery and political games at the palace. One evening, as Thomas and Clara walked along the quiet roads outside the town, he confided in her about his worries and doubts. "I don't know who I can trust anymore," he admitted. "My father's death has left me alone in so many ways. Duke Victor tells me that I should rely on him, but there is a part of me that feels like I am being used." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "You don't have to trust anyone blindly," she said gently. "The best leaders are those who listen to their hearts and learn from the people around them. Trust is built over time, and it must be earned." Her words made Thomas pause. He had never heard such simple yet profound advice before. He looked at her with a newfound sense of respect. "How do you know all this?" he asked. Clara smiled softly. "I have spent many years learning from books. Yes, but also from the people I meet. Sometimes it is in the smallest moments of kindness that we learn the most." Meanwhile, back in the town, Hannah had been busy investigating. She couldn't shake the feeling that Duke Victor was hiding something. She had been watching him closely ever since their arrival, and she had noticed that he was meeting with certain people in secret. One night, As Thomas and Clara were away, Hannah decided to follow him. She moved quietly through the streets, staying in the shadows, until she saw Victor meeting with a group of unknown figures in a secluded alley. They spoke in hushed voices, but Hannah's sharp ears picked up bits of the conversation. She heard mentions of money, power, and an unspoken promise to help Thomas in exchange for loyalty. Hannah's heart sank. She had been right all along. Victor was playing a dangerous game, and Thomas was his pawn. The next morning, Hannah wasted no time in telling Thomas what she had discovered. She found him in the garden, sitting with Clara. Her heart tightened as she approached him. She had to tell him the truth, even if it meant hurting him. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "I have uncovered something important. Duke Victor is not as loyal as he seems. He is conspiring against you." Thomas looked up at her, his expression a mix of surprise and disbelief. "What are you saying, Hannah?" "I followed him last night," she continued, "and I heard him speaking with others about his plans. He wants to take the throne for himself." Clara, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Victor has been manipulating you, Thomas. You cannot ignore this." Thomas felt a wave of anger wash over him. He had trusted Duke Victor, relied on him, and now he realized that he had been played. He turned to Hannah. "What should I do? How can I stop him?" Hannah placed a hand on his shoulder. "We need to expose him, but carefully. He has too many supporters, and we must be strategic." The time had come for Thomas to confront Duke Victor. With Hannah's guidance and Clara's calm support, Thomas began to prepare for the showdown. It would not be easy, and there was a risk that it could tear the kingdom apart. But the truth could no longer be hidden. The day of the great banquet arrived, and the palace was filled with nobles, advisors, and guests from every corner of the kingdom. Thomas stood at the head of the hall, his heart heavy, but his resolve strong. It was time to reveal Duke Victor for who he truly was. When Victor entered the room, he was greeted with cheers and smiles. He walked confidently, his eyes gleaming with the belief that he had already won. But as he took his place, Thomas stood up and addressed the gathering. "Honored guests," Thomas began, his voice firm, "I have something to share with you all today. A truth that must be known." He motioned for Hannah to step forward, and she did so without hesitation. She stepped up beside Thomas and began to recount everything she had learned about Victor's betrayal, the secret meetings, the promises of power, and the plans to undermine Thomas's rule. Victor tried to deny it, but his words fell flat. The nobles were already whispering, their eyes filled with disbelief. Thomas presented the evidence Hannah had gathered, and with the support of Clara and a few loyal witnesses, the truth was laid bare. The court was silent, and then, one by one, the nobles began to turn away from Victor. His fate was sealed. Thomas looked at him coldly. "You are stripped of your titles and banished from this kingdom. Leave before I have you removed by force." Victor stood there, humiliated, before he turned and fled from the palace. His once proud figure now a broken shadow. The kingdom was in shock after the events of that day, but as time passed, the people began to feel a sense of hope. Thomas had proven himself to be a leader who could see through deception and protect his people. He learned to trust not only in his own judgment, but in the guidance of those who truly cared for him. Clara continued to be by his side, offering her wisdom whenever he needed it. And Hannah, ever loyal, remained his most trusted advisor, though Thomas had grown stronger and more confident with each passing day. Years later, Thomas, now a respected and beloved king, stood before his people. With Clara by his side as his queen and Hannah still by his side as his advisor, Thomas had built a kingdom that thrived under fairness and justice. One day, to honor Hannah for her years of service, Thomas declared a grand festival in her name. The entire kingdom gathered to thank her for her unwavering loyalty and courage. Hannah, though modest, was deeply moved by the recognition. The kingdom of Eldoria prospered, and its people flourished under a wise and just ruler. Thomas had learned the value of trust, loyalty, and the strength that comes from the support of those who truly care about us. And so the kingdom was at peace, its future bright,